Okay, so we'll start now. Good evening, everyone who's joining us live or recorded. Tonight, we are welcoming you to our fourth and final installment of the New Jersey ACEP Leadership Development Series. During this session, we will hear from a panel of emergency physicians who have furthered their careers beyond emergency medicine. I've been fortunate to meet each and every one of these individuals along my career, and I'm very gracious that you've given your time in order to come and share what you've learned and how you have progressed beyond emergency medicine. I am Dr. Janice Baker, and I'm proudly serving as New Jersey ACEP's 2021-2022 president. Thank you all for participating. So right now, I will do introductions for our panelists. And after that, we'll ask a few questions. After the questions, if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns that you'd like to bring up, you can message it in the chat and we'll be able to answer those questions afterwards. So I would like to begin by introducing our panelists. I will start with Dr. Lee Jablow, who's a board certified emergency physician, former chair of emergency medicine at Tower Health, Chestnut Hill Hospital. And in July 2020, jumped at an opportunity to join the team at Johnson & Johnson in global medical safety as part of their COVID-19 vaccine program. In his responsibilities as director, safety surveillance physician with J&J, Dr. Jablow evaluates safety data from many sources, including clinical trials and marketed products. In addition to rigorous work on the COVID-19 vaccine over the last year, Dr. Jablow has worked on a factor IX inhibitor, the next generation of anticoagulation, entering phase 3 development and multiple developmental oncology products that truly have the potential to change the trajectory of cancer care. He particularly enjoys the global impact of the work as J&J's products touch the lives of millions of patients and consumers across the globe. A background in emergency medicine has been particularly helpful as Lee transitioned to a physician role in industry. And Dr. Jablow is very grateful to the many mentors, teachers, healthcare staff, and patients who have helped train him for this career path. Thank you, Dr. Jablow, for being with us today.
Thanks, Janice, for having me.
And also, I have to say, him leaving his job gave me my new job, so I have to thank him for that as well. Next, we have Dr. Dara Cass, who was just recently named the HHS Regional Director, Region 2 by President Joe Biden. Dr. Cass is a graduate of SUNY Downstate College of Medicine and the Kings County Hospital Emergency Medicine Residency. She began her career in resident education at Staten Island University Hospital, followed by medical student education at NYU School of Medicine, and most recently was an associate professor of emergency medicine at the Columbia University School of Medicine. A champion for gender equity and the advancement of women in medicine, Dr. Cass' academic work has focused on creating a more equitable workspace for women in medicine. Most recently, she has shifted focus to policy and public communication in regards to the COVID pandemic. She has focused her communication on the impact of COVID on communities and families, empowering Americans to make informed decisions for themselves and their families. Region 2 is based in New York City and serves New York, New Jersey, U.S. territories in the Caribbean, and several federally recognized tribal nations. Thank you, Dr. Cass, for agreeing to participate on this panel.
Thank you for having me.
Next on the panel is my dear friend, Dr. Tanya Walker. Dr. Walker earned her medical degree from the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. She then went on to do her clinical training in emergency medicine at the New York Presbyterian Hospital at Columbia University and Cornell. She then completed her fellowship in preventative medicine and public health at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, while earning her MPH degree from the Mailman School of Public Health while serving as core faculty at Columbia University Medical Center. During her fellowship with the NYC Health Department, she was introduced to the field of occupational medicine and then did an additional training in occupational medicine at the University of Pennsylvania while serving as the lead physician in a medical center occupational medicine practice. She then entered the field of corporate occupational medicine in her role as the head of medical and occupational health for Unilever North America. She most recently joined Netflix as a Global Chief Medical Officer and Director of Employee Health. Thank you, Dr. Walker, for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
And finally, I would like to introduce one of our fellow New Jersey ACEP board members, Dr. Svetlana Zakarenko. Dr. Zakarenko works as an ED attending at Palisade Hospital. She served as Emergency Ultrasound Division Director at Hackensack University Medical Center from 2013 until 2021, where she was also a core faculty for a residency and an associate professor at HMN Medical School. Dr. Zakarenko is a founder of Focus Ultrasound Solutions, a consulting service dedicated to assisting institutions in building an infrastructure for effective point-of-care ultrasound utilization. After seeing how a high-quality point-of-care ultrasound program helps patients, clinicians, and hospitals, Dr. Zakarenko was inspired to help more organizations realize its benefits. Throughout her career, she has trained hundreds of clinicians on proper use of point-of-care ultrasound use. She has also collaborated with the CMO, executive offices, and the Joint Commission on a variety of initiatives. She has worked to advance this field through published research articles and as a contributor to National Clinical Ultrasound ACEP guidelines. Thank you, Svetlana.
Thank you. Glad to be here and humbled.
So now we will begin with questions for the panelists regarding how they landed in their current careers. And we want this to be interactive. So if you have any additional questions, please use the monitor chat box and we will pause the session to address your question. We'll also just provide open Q&A at the end of our formal questions as well. So question number one, and we can start off with Dr. Jablow and continue down, is when did you decide to change pathways from clinical emergency medicine and why?
So Janice, thanks for having me. As you mentioned, my previous role before this was medical director at Chestnut Hill Hospital in the ED, and I know the team is so thrilled that Janice has taken over for them. I will tell a very quick story that I was getting my COVID booster the other day, and I was, sitting in the chairs thinking, do I really wait the full 15 minutes? I think I'm fine. And I heard this soothing voice come on the radio, and it was Dr. Janice Baker on a commercial. So she's everywhere, and I'm glad for that. So when I was working in the ED and being medical director, Janice can tell you, and any of you on this call may also have experience, it's crazy, right? You work, you go in for a meeting at 7 a.m., you finish at 3 with your meetings, then you go in for your shift at 3, sometimes it finishes at 1:30 in the morning, and then the real decision is, what do you do the next morning? Do you log in for that 7 a.m. virtual meeting, or do you come in for it, or do you not go at all? And kind of setting boundaries can be tough when you're involved in so much. Do you do that radio interview or not? So, long term, I think I don't have to tell this team, right? It's a challenging career in the ED, and the thing that was really hard for me was to figure out, well, what else could I do that I would not only feel good about, but feel really good about, like I'm doing something more meaningful. So pharma was not an option for me. That was not a place I wanted to be because I only knew what I thought I knew about it. And then when I learned about drug safety, which is this whole different field, there was a fellowship actually at J&J that they had a 1-year training where you basically learn about vaccines and drugs and how to manage clinical trials on the safety end. So when you read about safety endpoints and serious adverse events, of course we know that from reading literature, but what does that actually mean? What does the company do when there's an intracranial hemorrhage in a clinical trial, when there's pneumocystis pneumonia? Like what do we do about that? Do we stop the trial? What do we do with the J&J vaccine when there's a thromboembolic event with thrombocytopenia and no one knows what's going on? So that was me and my team trying to sort through that at the case level and in aggregate. So it seemed to me like it was the perfect time to make that transition and to still be able to apply my ED, knowledge and skills. So that's my story. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Cass.
So I did not seek out training to do this or anything else. So basically, I'll explain my job a little bit and then it'll explain how you'll figure out how I got here. So I am the regional director for the Department of Health and Human Services Region 2. So as hopefully some of you remember from high school civics, if you had it, there is a president of the United States, and then there is a cabinet. And in the cabinet, there are secretaries, and each of them obviously oversees an agency. So there's a Department of Health and Human Services, and there's a secretary. His name is Javier Becerra. And then within the agency, there are many different other agencies that run, including in Health and Human Services. We know there's CMS, there's an agency called HRSA, which it works with FQHCs, our federally qualified health centers. There are children and family services, and there's all these, it's a huge agency. And so one of the ways that the federal government stays in touch with state and local governments is to have regional directors. So the country's brought up into 10 regions. I am the regional director for Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and 8 tribal territories, all of which are in New York. And so the regional director is a political appointee. They are appointed by the President of the United States. So your tenure as regional director actually is as long as the administration wants you to stay there. So it is theoretically possible to cross administrations, although not historically accurate, I guess. So when this administration took over, they started looking at appointing new regional directors amongst the other thousands of federal employees they need to put in. So I was identified as somebody who would be a good idea for Region 2 under HHS, basically because of my relationships with the elected officials in my region, the healthcare systems, and really understanding the constituencies. One of the best parts about this job for me, and like I said, I wasn't looking to leave clinical medicine. It wasn't like I had already been part-time, which I think was the answer I was looking for, doing work with M&M and other things that other people had seen. And I'd really found what I thought was the perfect balance of clinical work and other stuff that made me happy. But this is a full-time job. So when I was approached to see if I was interested, I really had to reconcile, am I ready to leave clinical medicine for a period of time? And I'm still not entirely sure what I'm going to do with that, because I like being a doctor, and I think that the clinical aspect of my experience, and especially after the past 2 years, really did inform why I was good for this job and why I would continue to be good for the job. I think it's important that a lot of our elected officials understand what it means, the decisions that they make, and what it means for actual patient care. And I already see how I'm able to kind of like convey that in the work that I'm doing at the agency level and at the advocate level. And so that's where I am right now. I hope to be here for the next few years doing this, and then who knows? I don't know what this could lead to or not. I could go back to the ER when this is all over, or I could end up at some other federal government agency, or maybe at a private corporation. I don't know. Right now, I've kind of pivoted a little bit, and I have no idea where that's going to land.
Thank you. And Dr. Walker?
Yes, thank you. It's funny, the question, right? Because it's like, when did you decide to leave clinical emergency medicine? I would say for me, I never really decided to leave clinical medicine. I think I was kind of forced to leave in a way by virtue of the pandemic, right? Which sounds crazy, you could say, because you're like, well, we're on the front lines and we need ER docs more than ever. But the way it happened is I was working part-time clinically, but then had this Unilever position as their medical director for North America. And when the pandemic hit, I was still seeing patients, but also building their pandemic response and building a team to keep manufacturing going, because we made products like soap, right? And sanitizer, things that we certainly needed in the pandemic, or still need in the pandemic. And so just by virtue of being pulled so much into that direction, where I was on global calls, building a team, working literally 24/7 to keep this company going in their biggest market, I kind of had to slowly just like parse down my shifts to the point where I looked back and it was like a month, 2 months, I hadn't seen a patient. And so it wasn't that I decided. I was even joking with the panelists prior to going live here that, I'm hopeful to kind of get back into it. Now, whether it's back into the ED or back into something a little bit more low key, maybe in urgent care, maybe occupational medicine, clinical occupational medicine again, certainly something I would be happy to entertain. But for now, it's just, the pandemic's still here. It's keeping me really busy. You know, how I even got to corporate medicine, I'm still trying to figure out. I mean, granted, I had done all this additional training. I listened to my bio. I'm like, what is wrong? Like, if you hear that, you're like, why did she just keep going over and over? But I'll say that for me, going into emergency medicine as a clinical specialty really was kind of the feeding the public health love in me, because in this country, as we all know, we are the safety net in the ED. And so for me, it was very important that I could take care of anyone, anytime, anywhere. And it wasn't about the trauma, like some of my colleagues, they love trauma, or, you know, they always want to just put it in a chest tube, or they love intubating, or, you know, they'll say they're ADD and you just like doing a bunch of things. For me, it was really just about being able to take care of anybody, no matter their ability to pay or not. And so that's why even as an ER doc, I continued to pursue my love of public health and went to do additional training in preventive medicine, and then landed in occupational medicine, always thinking I would do medical center occupational medicine, and the corporate stuff kind of fell in my lap. So.
Thank you. And Dr. Zakachenko.
Thank you. I guess I have a little bit of a parallel with Dr. Walker, but I was put into a position which many of us all over the country were put into in the ED market, and along with a number of attendings in my hospital, was laid off from my academic job of many, many years. At that point, had to ask myself, well, what is my talent, as there are no EM jobs available? At least I wasn't willing to move, or I couldn't move because of my family situation. There were no jobs locally whatsoever. And that's where my entrepreneurial endeavor came from, partially out of fear, but mostly of the need and an opportunity, I would say, to self-renew, self-reevaluate, maybe some would say rebrand, redefined. And that's how Focus Ultrasound Solutions was born. Focus Ultrasound Solutions is designed to assist community hospitals. I've never worked in the community ED myself, always been in academia, but it is designed to aid the departments to build an infrastructure that can risk mitigate using point of care ultrasound and bill for it. So to jump into it, I had to kind of reevaluate my whole life, discuss with my partner and my family, needed to decide whether this kind of drastic change is conducive to our needs. I do have 2 little boys, 4 and 7, so life is busy. But my goal as a part of this panel today is maybe to define and outline some of the universal steps of starting a business. Not everyone wants to start an ultrasound business. Not everyone wants to start a consulting business, but there are some basic steps to starting any business. I'm currently a single member limited liability company, and a friend of mine just recently started a cosmetics business. Somebody started a wellness business. We've kind of had this common formula we had to go through, and that I'd like to, I guess, share that with you today.
Well, thank you, because that actually will lead into our next question. But I just thought it was interesting, all of the panelists, what you've described. Some described wanting a change from, you know, doing director work as well as clinical work and balancing that together. Dara talked about, you know, just all the relationships that she made and how this opportunity just kind of happened. Tanya talked about always wanting to work, you know, taking her job as a physician more on a public health view. And that's why the further sort of training and education, and it just so happened a pandemic happened, and trying to do that on a corporate level as well. But it still leads to, you know, providing products and services that is needed for the public's health. And Svetlana, you're right, not many physicians ever thought, especially being emergency medicine physicians on the front line, that you would not have a job. It just seemed paradoxical, but there you were, and almost like an ED doc, you know, training to kind of compromise, or okay, we can't do it that way, let's find it a different way, kind of sort of had to find a different way to provide for your family. So the next question is, what, you know, preparation was needed for this new career pathway? And maybe we can go in reverse, because you started talking about that, Svetlana, with, you know, opening up a business. How would you even do that? Or how did you go about that?
You'd like me to start, Janice?
Yes, go ahead.
Wonderful. So my idea began with a massive talking to others and a market research. These are the terms that I've never really known, actually, market research, but that's what I had to do. I talked to a multitude and layers of people. I talked to a regional director of a managed care practice company. I talked to individual medical directors and chairs to see what their needs are. Talked to all of my friends who worked in the community. And by all, I mean I reached out to all the 8 years of graduate residents and kind of created my own survey of what's out there. I just did not know. And I found lots of surprises, some things I already knew, including I talked to some of the non-EM physicians to see if my potential business model could apply to something that's not EM. So low-hanging fruit was just hospital-wide approach, but also other fruit was office medicine. These are the things that I didn't traditionally think ultrasound belonged in. So I just talked and talked and talked. And eventually after talking, I created maybe my own personal kind of board of directors of my closest people who really understood who I was, who understood what I wanted to do. And they became my unofficial board of directors who I went to with every layer of thought that I had and every idea that I had to reinvent and see, should I take it this way or that way? So that's the original piece in it. Then I arrived to this kind of, I guess, vision that I thought would be a good one to move forward. I didn't know I was going to be moving forward originally, but I decided to. I got a lot of positive feedback and kind of structured it. And from there on, things became very technical. I've always been taught you need a lawyer to create an LLC. You don't. I created my own LLC and a certificate of New Jersey formation, New Jersey State formation, all on my own. And it cost me all about $125 that I paid to the government. So didn't need a lawyer. I shopped around, I talked, I asked, but that's all I paid for really becoming a company. I talked to my MBA friends, just kind of asking, what is a business plan? How do I write one? How do I create a proposal for return on investment to my clients that I'm going to be talking to? How do I calculate my budget? How do I plug in things into my budget? Somebody once told me, you want to find a formula how to fail as fast as possible in order for you to find what really works. So that kind of like struck my interest. I want to fail. So every business is supposed to fail to really find itself. All in all, I hired about 4 people, I would say. There was a website developer. That's number one. There was a branding specialist or a logoist. That was a separate person. A copywriter. These are, again, the terms that I did not know before, but that's actually like a profession, a copywriter who wrote all of my content. I could have written it myself, but I was not willing to take that chance. And a photographer. So those were the 4 pieces that went into it. I'm happy to discuss the actual budget of it, but for the sake of time, I'll just go forward. I would say I kind of breathed and lived and slept all on my idea. It was kind of an all-encompassing. I decided that I wasn't going to be looking for an academic or administrative job, particularly because I wanted all of my time spent on development of my company. So I actually had some opportunities to get into administration and I turned it down. I wanted to just dedicate myself. In fact, I was looking for a community medicine-based job because I wanted to know the market that I was trying to sell my product to. And at some point I had a domain name. Actually, I had 3 domain names. I had a website, I had a business card, I had a trifold that I could send to the clients. And I felt that I could present myself, and I did. So that was the very beginning. I don't want to get into the details of the consulting business, but it's very individually tailored to each institution. So every time that I've exchanged emails or had a Zoom call, I learned from every client. So that was very nice. Simultaneously, and I'm almost done. Simultaneously, I was talking to a multitude of potential partners as well. I want to stress that all it really took is just to start a conversation and continue going. I talked to colleagues and colleagues of colleagues and just continued. Never really approached anyone with a question about partnership, but just presented myself and saw what comes out of it. And I'm currently having 3 kind of big scale discussions for potential joint ventures. They're very exciting. And I recommend if anyone wants to take this entrepreneurial path to also explore this part of the entrepreneurial business, I guess. Currently, I'm kind of in the place where I'm redeveloping myself, kind of figuring out how to move forward. I do have a clinical job now, so the timing was perfect because I needed to put a lot of time in originally. Currently, it's more maintaining and continuing the conversations and working as well. But that first bandwidth that I really needed to create what I created and what I have now was thanks to, I guess, the free time that I had.
Thank you, Svetlana. Tanya, what prepared you to be now the Chief Medical Officer at Netflix?
Well, I mean, all the training I did, let's start there. But I certainly didn't do it effort to become the chief medical officer at Netflix. But second to that, I think, to just kind of piggyback on Svetlana's comments, it's really about a lot of talking, right? So a lot of networking, meeting different people. I'll say I certainly pre-COVID leveraged ACEP, the American Public Health Association conferences, American College of Occupational and Environmental Medicine conferences, and really just kind of putting myself out there, meeting a lot of people, seeing what types of opportunities would be available to someone who is triple trained and boarded in these specialties that may not have seemed to be related in any way. And it was by virtue, honestly, of just talking to people, meeting people, giving out that business card, sending those emails, is how I got a call about the Unilever job. Again, I was not looking for it. In fact, I was seeing patients and working in a startup online company for emergency physicians that Dara will be familiar with. And so I was doing that and taking care of my kids, and was like, all right, I don't know what I'm gonna do with all this training, but it's cool doing these random things and taking care of my kids. And then I get this phone call from Unilever, and this is pre-COVID, right? And so I had now had all these skill sets, not knowing that a pandemic was around the corner. About a year later is when COVID hit, and recognized very quickly that my training, I was able to pull on every part of the training that I had, literally every single thing. It was actually amazing. So prepared for the moment. But that's really it, right? Just following my heart, not knowing what I was going to do, just knew I wanted to do public health and leverage my clinical skills. Did all this training that everyone said, why are you doing that? Like, that's a waste of time. It's expensive, blah, blah, blah. And here we are. So follow your gut is the message there.
Thank you, Tanya. So Dara, you're up. What was your preparation for your new job and position?
So I think that I'm going to echo what Tanya said, which is basically like, and I think almost also what Svetlana said. I mean, FMNM was a business, right? Before this, it was, so I had actually this incredible experience with, like, clinical medicine, entrepreneurship, and politics. I had done a lot of work, especially over the past couple of years, on policy and politics. I think a lot of people had seen that. And I really made enormous connections, I think, local, state, and federally. That really set me up to have a optionality in spaces that I'd never had, right? So it started out just institutions, and then it went broader and broader, and to the point where when I looked to the federal government for opportunities, they came back to me with what seemed like the actual perfect job for me. They were like, well, how would you like to be the regional director for the Department of Health and Human Services, interfacing with all the people you've been taking care of for the last 20 years almost, but also making sure that the people that you've elected to office understand why that's important. And in so many ways, I came home with my husband and said, I think I just found the perfect job, which is kind of an amazing thing to think when you already thought you had a job that was so perfect for you. And really, it's because I was leaning into the things that I was good at and acknowledging also the things that I was not good at. So one of the things I was never going to be, at least I don't think so, as a chair of emergency medicine at a single institution, because I don't think that that's the best use of my time or talent. And so I had really started looking outside of those kind of normal structures for my own success, because of the kind of the insight that I had into the ways that I worked really well. And again, I'll echo kind of what Tanya said, which is that I really just kept my eyes and ears open constantly for opportunities that I thought fit me really well, while still staying the course, right? So I didn't ever take an abrupt change. I just listened and looked around. And then when I had to kind of make decisions in front of me, I did it. And so far, like I said, it's only been 3 weeks since this job started, so who knows? But it's certainly going to be an interesting couple of years. There's a lot of legislation out there that's going to be really impactful to our community, and so I think that it's going to be a really great opportunity for me to be, at the table, at least to make sure that everyone understands why it's important that these things all work.
Thank you, Dara. And Lee?
Yeah, so I also have 2 young kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old girl. And so we don't see them walking around the house saying, I want to be a Region 2 director for HHS, or I want to be a safety surveillance physician, right? That's not part of the plan until we're as old as we are now, right?
My kids totally walk around saying they want to be regional director for HHS.
Right? Now they do. But you know what I mean? So our whole life like was planned ahead for 5, 10, even 15 years when we were, applying to medical school. And yeah, sure, there were little things that we thought we would do, but I certainly never thought I would be doing this. So I think it doesn't matter though, because all those skills that we developed prepared us for this moment, right? Communication skills, right? Critical thinking skills, advocacy skills, all of that stuff. So we're all applying everything and we may talk about this soon, but being an ER doc is the perfect tee up for this world that we're in now.
Well, thank you. I do think that that's true. And even with my limited foray into different things, like with the public service announcement, I do think that emergency medicine allows you sometimes the time and flexibility to lean into other interests so that you can take advantage of those relationships that you guys have talked about and built, and then realizing what those relationships can lead to later down the line. Now I'll ask a question. I don't know who wants to answer first. Do you think, because it seems overwhelmingly that you guys have all said that EM training has supported you, do you think there's been any experience or time that you thought emergency medicine training hindered you in this new role?
I will say, has it hindered me? Absolutely not. I mean, everything I do is through the lens of an ER doc always. And probably people are tired of hearing me say that, in fact. But I will say that as I was pursuing these different training options, a question I would get a lot is, you're an ER doctor, why would you want to do this? Right? We've never had an ER doctor apply to work at the health department. Either what's wrong with you or what's wrong with the ER, right? And so I would say that, if there is something that is really driving you or something that you're truly interested in and just want to learn more about, keep pushing despite what people say. And I know I don't have to really tell that to a group of ER doctors, honestly. But just in case there's someone out there who's second guessing it, just push through, because I got a lot of naysayers and second guessers throughout this entire process. Of at least my additional training beyond emergency medicine. And I would say still, even despite all of that, the training that I got in the ER to be an advocate, not only for my patients and for the department, but for myself, has helped me to get where I am now.
Yeah, and I think ER docs can be a little bit, I don't know if pushy is the right word, but we like to get stuff done, right? And we like to get it done efficiently and effectively. And we might not tolerate a whole lot of dancing around and corporate, world stuff. But believe me, I learned that in my first couple months. You really have to adjust and be a chameleon. At the same time, who better than us to do that, right? To learn a new setting, a new disease, or you put your hat on differently when you're talking to a hospitalist than you do to a surgeon, and you got to use those skills to adapt. So yeah, EM training said you're not working with ER doctors anymore, so you got to get out of that mindset, or ER nurses. But I think we have a lot of skills to bring along to any other job.
Maybe I'll tag it along what Lee's saying. So I am not talking to other nurses, but I am talking to potential clients. And patience is very important in business, to meter out how you talk to clients, when you talk to them again, if you're getting a feeling that there's a rejection coming from, as you're offering your services, kind of how to pace yourself. And right, you're right, Lee, as ER doctors, we just want to keep on going at the speed that we want to keep on going. And that doesn't always work in entrepreneurship. So I agree with you on that. But for the rest of it, I would just comment that if you're starting your own business and you are selling your product, I think I'm maybe the only one in the group who is just self-employed. You will run into difficult times, and we are the best at seeing tough and kind of reevaluating and rebuilding ourselves or changing your approach, because we have to do that all the time. We see instances in the clinical medicine where we kind of just have to jump off and do what we've never done before, and that's what you do with business. I had to learn the language of business that I've never learned before, and the ER training is helping me in how to do that very effectively.
Thank you for that. I would actually say the one thing I realized is also realizing when other people aren't emergency medicine doctors and they're like, oh, is this the hardest thing you've ever done? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's never the hardest thing. But anyway.
So I will
there
say,
is-
what Denise, just to say that, I mean, I will be completely honest, like there is something relaxing, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart in this very safe space, that knowing that every day I wake up and do something that not somebody couldn't die in front of me. Like, and I
Yes.
mean this really honestly. Like, I think that like I have like my sense of calm around the work that I do. And even though the work that I do now is a different scale and could impact so many people's lives, even, but the individual pressure that I feel daily has almost entirely gone away. And I personally, and back to Lee's point, I think I had my entire focus on that had changed around the time that I had kids and my parents got older, and I felt very much responsible for my community and their health. I felt like there was a difficulty in the amount of anxiety I had around work and then coming home and worrying about everyone else's health and wellness. So for me, I think that is true. I even say it to publicists all the time, like it's PR, not ER. So like, you're going to be just fine. Like no emergency is that bad. We can take care of this. Nobody's going to die.
No, definitely. I appreciate that on my admin days. There is a question that has come in, and I'm going to pull it up. So do the panelists have any specific tips or suggestions for a junior faculty member who's a second year attending, who is interested in pivoting to a management/leadership role, perhaps maybe pharma, insurance, or hospital leadership, with career potential and similar income growth? Background, they're working on their MBA and they are very active within their department's administration.
I would just say something's got to give, right? You're not going to get it all. So you're not going to get maybe the pay you want. You're not going to maybe get the prestige you want. You're not going to maybe get the, maybe you might not love the first role you take outside of the ED as much as another one. And if you're looking for something perfect, you're not going to find it. So, and I think all of us on this call have been pushed in one way or another to make a decision that we didn't even really intend to make. So, you have to be a little bit risk tolerant. You have to be willing to take, a calculated risk, but you're never going to have that 100%, oh yeah, this is the right thing. Now, when you apply to medical school, there's no like, oh, I don't know. I'm really just not sure if I should be a doctor, because everybody's telling you to be a doctor, or I just don't know if this is the right thing, because there's 1,000 other people doing the same thing. This is just you. So I would just say to whoever asked that question, be willing to say, I don't know, but I'll try.
I will say, just to kind of also answer that, is that this is like, we are, I think all of us at a similar time from graduation from residency enough, and I think that and I've had this question about the time it takes to get here, right? So, and I had this with medical students and residents, and then, all the time, it's like, when I was doing Fem&M and I was part-time, and it's like, when do you go part-time? What do you do? And I think that you need to remember that all of this is possible because the foundations that were developed in the emergency department, working clinically, understanding the landscape, understanding the decisions that had to be made, and making sure that you took those skills. And that can take, my personal opinion is it could take up to 10 years. As far as like between residency and attendingship, and really understanding to have that deep foundation to be able to be good outside, as opposed to the feeling that you right away want to like a year or two out of residency. So get the MBA, work in the ER, join committees, understand the hospital system, understand all the ways that you can have leadership opportunities, whether it's in your department or outside your department. Because like Lee said, nobody wants to be the regional director of HHS when they're 5 years old. I wouldn't have known about this at all if I wasn't active in local government and I didn't actually have relationships at the state and federal level. And so I would say that keep going forward to things that interest you and build those foundational blocks that make you qualified for that, and say yes to the great opportunities and no to others. But, realize that you're not going to have a perfect, like Lee was saying, a perfect path forward. And most importantly, don't forget to build those foundational blocks, because that's why we're good at what we do.
Yeah, I would second all of that. Two things I wanted to mention, reiterating this idea of being open. right? Like, again, we come from this very well played and thought out pathways, and it can be very like jarring when you're at the end of it and you're like, well, what's next? And no one's outlined that for you and you have no idea. Or you realize what's next, and it's being an attending and maybe going for your MBA, and a few years go by and you're like, okay, now what's next? And like, you got to figure it out, right? And so what I would say is, you know, obviously whoever asked the question is getting the additional degree, joining all of the appropriate committees. And I'll tell you, I joined some hospital committees before I left academics, and it was just like, this is not really doing it for me in the way that I thought it would. And so I pivoted. This corporate world, never in a million years that I think I would work in a corporate environment, like ever. Sometimes I'm even still like,
I didn't think I'd work in government.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I got the call for Unilever, and I remember distinctly saying, yeah, corporate, no. Because initially they said Unilever, and I said, oh, what hospital is that? And they're like, no, it's not a hospital. It's like, oh, so why are you calling me? And so I looked at it and I was like, okay, I'm gonna just jump in and see what happens, right? It was just this idea of being open. And then, so being open to opportunities, but also like, let's talk real. Sometimes you got to take a pay cut, right? Like, that's a thing, whether you want to or not. Going to the New York City Health Department, there were some really great job opportunities that I wanted to do post-fellowship, and I was like, I can't live in New York City and earn this much money, right? And so then it was like, well, you think about moving, and blah, blah, blah. And so you just have to weigh a lot of different options, but just understand that, to Lee's point at the top, maybe you can't get everything all the time at the same time, right? And it may mean moving and shifting at different points in your career in order to, at the end of it, look back and say, yes, I did everything that I would have wanted to do with my time in medicine. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I think that was insightful. You probably can't get everything all at one time. Something has to give. But again, I think you need the time and experience to gain the relationships, gain the experience that may then lead to that opportunity. And it may not be able to occur immediately, you know, a few years as being an attending. So the last question, then we can open it up, is if you could go back in time, would you change anything career-wise? Would you have kept the path? Would you have said, you know what, I'll just go back to the ED? And even though if you go in the future, the one benefit of our jobs or our skill set is we could actually all go back to the ER. But if you were to go back in time, would you take this same path?
I could start with that. I would say absolutely no. I am exactly where I am because of all the things that I have done, and I was there at that time for a reason. It's kind of, I guess, a continuum of exactly what we were just talking about. So I honestly and personally would not have changed anything because everything that I've done before led me to where I am. What I would say maybe I could have altered is more on the personal level. I recently read a book. I was actually reading it as I was creating my company. It's called Do Nothing. The title doesn't really serve the purpose. I disagree with the title because it is not at all what it's trying to achieve. But the author talks about this idle mind, and idle, not so much lazy, but more like free roaming mind. And I've learned to do this as I was creating my company and continue doing this. And I wish I did this more. So what she's saying is that if you let your mind run and kind of just not even meditate or not target run, just let it be creative, the thing that children do really well. And if you do this on a regular basis, you kind of inviting your own genius into your life. And I feel that if I've done that a little bit more before I was laid off, where I could just fantasize and think about the things that I could do, I might have come to this path a little bit earlier, this entrepreneurial path. And I hope I am delivering that I really, really like this path. And I like this genius that came into me, and I'm going to continue doing that more. So again, that's my little input in what I could have done differently.
Thank you, Svetlana. Anyone else?
I mean, the one thing I would just say is that I have been, and I think everyone here, and probably some of you on this call right now who are politely sitting quietly, kind of musing about, maybe I could do something different. Maybe I should try to do, pick something else up, or maybe I should make a big change. There were a lot of times where opportunities come to you. But a lot of this also is advocating, I think, for yourself and your skill set, right? So you know yourself and your abilities better than anyone else. And sure, you have connections, and Dara's a great example of like all of those little things she did over the last several years, right? These little relationships had become important at the end of the day. But sometimes you got to speak up for yourself too. And you may, you're probably not going to, again, just thinking about everyone in the room, you're probably not going to call up a corporate company and be like, here's why I'm great. You should create a job for me. But maybe there's going to be an opportunity where you interview for something that you might not fit like the job profile for. Maybe it says you need like in my company, you might need 6 years of experience doing X, Y, and Z. And you're like, I don't have 6 years of experience doing that. And maybe there's a way where you can, make it work based on your other skills if you just stand up for yourself. So I think a lot of us are saying like, oh yeah, we got lucky, but I think we all probably worked pretty hard to, in some ways, brand yourself.
So I will echo that. So I got lucky, but I'm a big fan of creating your own future, right? Everyone who knows me knows that I imagine things and I seek them out, and then I really work to make them happen. And so in this particular case, I had envisioned possibly going to the government, didn't know anything about what I wanted to do, put 100,000 feelers out there to anybody that I thought I had a relationship with and said, what do you think I should do? Do you think I'd be good at this? Do you think I'd be good at that? I went through a massive book of federal jobs. It's called the Plum Book. It has 4,000 jobs. And I sat with it and studied it to see what jobs were out there, not even understanding the language that they were using, but kind of just starting to understand more about what was going on. And then I started leaning into relationships I had and bouncing off people. Should I be this? Should I be that? And most of those jobs I was never, not even qualified for. There were already like probably 1,000 people online waiting for those jobs, but who knew what I could do? And the other thing I think that's important, back to what Lee said, is that you do have to sell yourself. And this is something that I think if you ever want to leave the kind of straight and narrow of clinical medicine and do it, you do have to be able to verbalize the skill set that you have developed and how that translates to the new world that you're trying to go into, because they don't know you and they don't understand what you know and you know how to do. So convincing, kind of people, and this can be easily true in any of the other jobs that anybody has, even Svetlana, if you're convincing either a possible client or a bank about your skill set when you've never run a business before, is to lay out, what do you know about budgeting? What do you know about management? How many people have you managed? What decisions have you made? How does it translate? I mean, one of the most compelling things I was able to communicate was the idea that team-based management in the emergency department is just as valuable as team-based management in a corporate environment, that our ability to communicate and inspire people right in that moment is so applicable to running an office or running a division. And these may not be the analogies that anybody's heard before, but I had to sell myself as a leader in a space that I had never led before, in order to get myself to enter at a level that I thought was applicable to my skill set. So, because in this environment, I could tell all you guys I want a job, and there's probably most that I would get, as a leadership role, but in this other world, they didn't know me. Anyway, so I think I would say not I wouldn't do anything different, but the last thing I would leave you with is the idea of knowing how to describe the skills that you've developed in emergency medicine and sell them to a new environment is probably the most valuable thing you can think of when you're thinking of transitioning outside of pure clinical medicine into some other kind of work environment.
Well, thank you all for your time and answering the questions that we had. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions? You can either unmute yourself and speak or enter it into the chat.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Yeah. William Feigl of Filegi, I'm calling on you.
What I'm listening to and what I see here, it's just an observation. So maybe you could help me out. I'm an old guy here along with Dr. Meredith, and we've done various things in our careers. But my observation, and I, I've done emergency medicine for over 25 years in various roles. And I think when you work at a very high volume place, where many people do, they're in inner city or suburban areas that are very busy. I really think that the demands of the job is going to be like 20 years and you're out if you're a career physician. But I'm looking at you guys and, you're all young, at least compared to me. So the question is, why make that transition, when you're young and maybe you haven't been practicing for 20 years or something?
How old do you think we are?
I'm not. I learned a long time ago from my wife. You never guess at anybody's age here.
I've been doing this for almost 20 years.
Especially women. Okay, so you look a lot younger. But I'm just curious. I mean, I'm curious as to how many years, other people have been, in emergency medicine before you made the switch.
We'll go. So I graduated from residency in 2007, but medical school in 2003.
Right.
Lee, how old are you?
So I'm the youngest one. I finished residency in 2016. So
Okay.
I wasn't until 3.5 years into practice, or 3.5 years into practice that I even thought about doing anything else. But then it hit me pretty hard, and I was like, I am craving something more and different.
So for me, William, I would say that because the real question is why transition out of emergency medicine, correct? Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, depending upon how long you've been working. I mean, I can understand somebody who's been in it for 15, 20 years and basically says, enough is enough, because it's hard. There's no doubt about it, and wants to do something else, or they want to switch with family life and all. But, that's my question. Why? Because you guys are relatively young. All right, maybe there are some exceptions, sorry.
So I've been out for 10 years out of residency. And the reason why for me is because I wanted to make a difference. I feel like I have been making a difference working in the emergency department by seeing every patient. I was an educator and administrator, but this felt to me like a very unique opportunity. I saw a gap that was not filled. There is published research out there saying that there is a very wide gap between how we practice point of care ultrasound in academia and how we do in the community. So I know it sounds maybe a little idealistic or a little bit naive, but I kind of wanted to help people. For-profit, that is. Obviously, I run my own company, but it really felt to me that there was a gap. It was a gap that it would be good to fill for patients, because if community practice patients are not getting as much point of care ultrasound, which we all are believing is kind of a standard of care, that's a problem. I also was graduating many residents out of with very high level of knowledge of point of care ultrasound, then discovering that they're not using it to the same extent. I mean, I was teaching them nerve blocks and new cutting edge things, point of care ultrasound, but sometimes there was no machine, or the machine was parked in the closet. That seemed to me as a problem. And at some point I felt a little bit of guilt. Well, we as educators should have been concentrating a little bit more on the actual practice and use of it. So some of it really was this altruistic approach. I want to close that gap. I want to be an example for my little boys as a strong woman character, someone who's done something different, something unique, and achieved something. Not that I didn't achieve anything by becoming a doctor, but I wanted to undertake this interesting approach. I'm also kind of a type A person with lots of drive, and I felt that I can do this. I
also want to say one more thing before we go about what you said, William, is I do think the practice of emergency medicine now is not what it was when 25, 30 years ago. It's not what it was when I started. I think life and the expectations now are not what it was then. So I say that I didn't know that I was going to leave clinical medicine. I didn't make the decision to leave clinical medicine, but I did make the decision to work 1 to 2 shifts a week. And that was the only way that I was going to survive in this specialty. I do not agree that it is possible to stay 20, 30 years working 3 to 4 clinical shifts a week sustainably in emergency departments as they are staffed and functioned right now, especially if you have a family where you're a primary responsible parent. I think that one of the things Lee was saying is absolutely true. I could not go more with schedule inflexibility and being at the behest of a schedule every 3 months to deal with my children's schedules, and my spouse was over it. I think there's a lot of things about emergency medicine practice clinically that are taking away, like you said, lives, years off of our life, and that there has to be a holistic approach. And certainly right now at the end of the pandemic, it is not getting any better. And then when you look at like people losing their jobs while this is happening, pay cuts, more hours, there's so many pieces of this. This is part of the reason I went into government, was to start working on these solutions. But I would say that the idea that people are going to stay in an environment that is, in a lot of times abusive and traumatic, which can be a lot of these workplaces, especially as there may and may not be more priorities that are not the clinical outcomes of the patients. I think that that's something we need to look back at ourselves for and say, why are people asking 2 years out of residency about alternative careers? It's not because, all of a sudden everyone wants to work for Netflix. It's because the department itself has become, I think, not sustainable long-term for lots of people. Sorry, Janice,
Yeah,
that's my last thing. Tanya wants to say something for that.
Yeah, if that's okay. And I know we've got a minute.
No, go ahead.
But honestly, I think, for me, so I finished in 2010 ER residency. And even like throughout, I did a 4-year program. And even throughout that time, I remember seeing, like watching it happen, like real life, people just burn out, like my attendings, who are amazing, some of the smartest people I've ever seen, hardest working, great with patients, great teachers, where, by the time I was a 3rd year, I was just like, I don't even recognize them. They just became very ornery, angry people that were inconsiderate and difficult to be around, quite frankly. And I always knew I kind of had this public health passion I wanted to get into since I majored in public health in college. And I was like, I think this is the time to start thinking about how I can tap back into that, because I don't want to be this person after 3 years of being an attending, someone who when I walked in the front door, I really revered and looked up to. And then at the tail end of my program, I was just like, my God, if I ever become that, then what was this all for? And so to Dara's point, I think also just the way clinical medicine in general, not just even in the ED, but just, clinical medicine in this country has gone, where it's no longer really about the patient. Like it's just tough now. It's super tough to practice clinical medicine, not alone, emergency medicine. So I know it's very sobering because, again, people need care. We will need care. If we don't need it now, we'll need it eventually. And so we want to make sure that we've got people on those front lines who are there to give people the care that they need and deserve. But they don't make it easy. And so hats off to you, Dara, fighting the good fight. Let me know if you need help. I'm here, man, because we got to change the system, somehow.
Well, I want to thank you guys all for your time. And I think it's sort of come full circle with Bill's question. And really, he just put a comment in that it, is actually giving acknowledgement to the moral injury that has perhaps occurred with, our profession of practicing emergency medicine, or really the trauma, right? We take care of trauma patients, but it is traumatic being on the front lines all the time. And I think the COVID pandemic just is able to highlight certain issues or deficiencies. And I hope that this panel and just talking with all of you, for those that are here now and those that will view this later, kind of gives little insights into one, maybe how you might have a different passion, and you can kind of think about that, develop those relationships, and that passion might lead to a different career. But even as we're talking about perhaps some of the moral injury that has occurred within our profession, the fact that some of your passions are leading to helping that with just, the governmental focus, the policy focus, realizing it's a system and how we can approach things from a systems level. Because a lot of the different jobs that you're doing, you guys are doing things where it makes actually still an impact on the patients, on the communities, on the practicing community physician that may not have the skills for ultrasound to bring that as best practice to their patients. So as the president of New Jersey ACEP, I really thank and appreciate each and every one of you for giving your time and being a part of this final installation of our leadership developmental series. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.